You know things are bad when you come home from Capitol Hill expecting peace and end up at war with a woman in a visor who thinks her clipboard gives her divine authority. That was my first mistake, thinking that my return to my hometown would be a calm retreat. I had just taken a temporary leave from Congress to care for my father, a retired steelworker with early-stage Parkinson's. I thought I'd come back to the rhythms of the earth, birdsong, quiet porches, lawn chairs, and lemonade. Instead, I found Karen, the HOA president, the tyrant in pastel, and the woman who would later shoot my service dog in broad daylight. It started with a piece of paper, taped, not tucked, onto my front door like a war declaration. Violation number 103A. Lawn exceeds regulated height by 2.5 inches. 2.5 inches. I had barely finished unpacking. My furniture was still half wrapped in moving blankets. Yet there it was. The first warning shot, delivered not with a bang, but with printed legalese and smug formatting. I crumpled the letter, tossed it into the recycling bin, and muttered to myself, well, we're not in D.C. anymore. But I was wrong. I was in D.C., metaphorically, because HOA politics make congressional gridlock look like playground diplomacy. I wasn't alone. I had Valor, my 110-pound golden Labrador, who'd saved my life more times than I could count. Trained for combat. Veterans with PTSD, he could sense a panic attack 30 seconds before I could. He'd nudge me, gently at first, then firmly if I didn't respond. He'd guide me to safety, block strangers, ground me. His vest said, "Service animal, do not pet." His eyes said something deeper. You're safe. Valor had served beside me since my first congressional deployment to a war-torn foreign policy committee. Through high-security briefings, moments of national crisis, late nights with the Armed Services Panel, he was there, calm, reliable, my anchor in a world full of chaos. And yet, in this suburban cul-de-sac where American flags waved next to plastic flamingos, he was seen as a threat. Karen met Valor before she met me. I was unloading boxes when I heard her voice, sharp, nasal, brimming with entitlement. "That's a big dog," she said, arms folded. "What kind of animal is that? We don't allow aggressive breeds in this neighborhood." I turned, hand, still on the box, brow raised. "He's a service dog, Labrador, trained, certified, federally protected," she scoffed, as if the Constitution was just a suggestion. "We've had problems with dogs around here. I'll be watching him." Watching him. That phrase stayed with me. Over the next few days, it became clear Valor and I were under surveillance. Every morning I found Karen pacing her porch, phone in hand. I caught her filming Valor from behind her rose bushes when he relieved himself on our own property. Once, she screamed at us from across the street when Valor barked. Once, after a raccoon darted across the driveway. That week, I received 2 more notices, one for unauthorized use of reflective house numbers and another for non-standard porch furniture, an old rocking chair my late mother had refinished herself. I contacted the HOA office, assuming reason still existed somewhere, but the woman on the phone hesitated before whispering, "Honestly, sir, she runs the board. We all just try not to get targeted." Targeted. The word didn't sound like it belonged in suburban homeowner associations. It sounded like something I'd heard overseas, yet here it was. Same tactics, different battlefield. And then came the incident with the flag. It was Memorial Day. I raised the American flag at dawn, just like I'd done every year since I returned from Afghanistan. It flew proudly from the same old pole my father had used for decades. At 7:03 a.m., Karen arrived. "Flag display isn't permitted until 9 a.m. per seasonal ordinance," she chirped, holding a folded copy of the HOA guidelines. "That's a formal violation." I stared at her, my temper barely restrained. "I served this country, Karen. That flag was on my uniform, on my casket buddy's uniform. You're really going to fine me for honoring the dead? I don't care if you're Congress or king," she snapped, Rules are rules. That's when it clicked. She knew who I was. The whispered tones around the neighborhood. The sudden camera flashes. The exact wording of her insult. I'd hoped to lay low. I didn't plaster my status around. But somehow, she knew I was a sitting U.S. congressman. And instead of respect, it fueled her obsession. A week later, I caught her yelling at two neighborhood children who were petting Valor. He was sitting, still as stone, enjoying the affection. She demanded the kids back away from the attack dog. The kids were terrified. Valor looked confused. I confronted her that evening. You need to stop this, Karen. You're harassing a disabled veteran and his service dog. You need to follow the HOA rules like everyone else, she snapped. Or maybe you think being in Congress means you're above the law. I stared her down, every instinct in me fighting the urge to explode. I'm not above the law. I make the law, and you're on thin ice. She stormed off, but her expression told me everything. She wasn't backing down. She was escalating, and I had no idea how far she'd go. That night I couldn't sleep. Valor lay beside my bed, breathing slow and deep. The silence of the house amplified every creak, every rustle outside. I kept replaying her words, watching him. I installed a camera on the front porch the next morning, not because I was paranoid, because something told me, deep in my gut, that this wasn't over. It had only just begun. It was the kind of Saturday morning that tricks you into believing the world is good. Sunlight streamed through the pine trees like liquid gold. Birds trilled their endless morning symphony, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe. I was kneeling in the garden beside my father, helping him plant the summer tomatoes, something he used to do alone every year before his tremors started. Valor, as always, lay nearby on the front porch, a silent sentinel in his vest, ears alert but body relaxed. His tags glinted in the sun. He was home. We all were. Then it happened. A single sound tore through the stillness. Crack, loud, sudden, violent. It wasn't a car backfiring. It wasn't fireworks. I knew that sound far too well. A gunshot. My body reacted before my brain even registered. The truth. I whipped around, scanning the front yard, and that's when I saw him, Valor, collapsed on the wooden porch, motionless. There was blood, too much of it, spreading in a thick, dark pool beneath him. Karen stood across the lawn, both hands gripped around a small pink revolver, her fingers trembling. Her mouth was twisted in shock or rage or some grotesque hybrid of both. Her lips moved, but her voice was distant, drowned beneath the rising roar in my ears. Was coming at me. He was coming at me. I was afraid, she screamed. But Valor hadn't moved, not 1 inch. I knew that because I had seen him moments earlier, his body curled into that familiar, relaxed S shape, eyes half-lidded, simply observing the yard. He hadn't barked. He hadn't lunged. He hadn't even stood up. My knees hit the ground hard as I reached him, adrenaline blinding me to pain. Valor, I shouted, voice cracking. Hey, buddy, stay with me, stay awake. My hands moved on instinct, pressing down where the blood flowed freely, praying it was a limb, not the chest. His breathing was shallow, faint. But it was there. Thank God it was still there. My father, stunned silent at first, sprang into action. His hands trembled as he called 911, voice raw with panic. She shot the congressman's dog. He's bleeding. He's a service animal. He's licensed, trained. Karen didn't run. She didn't even drop the weapon. She just stood there, stunned, repeating the same thing. He was coming at me. He was dangerous. I felt threatened. Neighbors started, emerging from their houses. Some had heard the gunshot. Others saw it unfold through their security cameras. Cell phones were raised. One neighbor shouted, "She shot the dog for no reason. I saw it. He didn't move." A teenager from across the street, tears streaking his face, pointed toward his doorbell camera. I have it on video. The dog was lying down the whole time. I felt as if the entire world was moving in slow motion. Blood on my hands, sirens in the distance, the smell of summer grass thick with iron and grief. I removed my jacket, folded it under Valor's head, and pressed down harder on the wound. My voice dropped into a calm, practiced whisper I had used on battlefields and in hospital rooms. You're okay, boy. I've got you. Stay with me. You've done harder than this. When the paramedics and police finally arrived, they approached cautiously, guns still holstered but eyes wide. Sir, are you the one who called? One officer asked. No, I said hoarsely, holding up my bloody hands. But I'm the one she just tried to kill. Sir, can we get your name? I reached into my wallet with trembling fingers and handed over my ID, United States Congress clearly stamped across the top. The silence that followed was heavy. The officer's eyes widened as he scanned the name, and the weight of the moment shifted. What had once been treated like a neighborhood dispute became something much larger. Karen, seeing the reaction, paled. Wait, she stammered. You're that congressman? I stood slowly, chest heaving. Yes, Karen. The one you've been harassing for weeks. The one with the service dog you just shot. The one protected by federal law. Karen's gun slipped from her hands and clattered onto her driveway. The officers immediately detained her, cuffing her behind her back as she babbled excuses. I didn't know. He looked dangerous. I thought he was a threat. I didn't mean... But it was too late. Witnesses were giving statements. Video footage was being transferred to the police. An entire neighborhood had just watched a woman gun down a registered service dog in front of a U.S. congressman. Valor was rushed into an emergency veterinary ambulance, still breathing but barely. They wouldn't let me ride with him. Protocol, they said, but I followed in my truck, tailgating every red light, every stop sign. My father stayed behind to give his statement. As I drove, I wiped blood off my face with a sleeve and whispered, to myself, just hold on, buddy, don't you dare give up now. The veterinary ER was already prepping the OR when I arrived. I demanded to see him before they took him back. He was hooked up to fluids, his breathing labored but still present. I touched his head, and his eyes fluttered open. Just barely. You're gonna make it, I said, holding back tears. You've survived war zones. You'll survive this. Then they wheeled him away. Back at the crime scene, things unraveled, quickly for Karen. Once they confirmed the video footage showed Valor lying down calmly before the shot, the police had no choice. Karen was booked on multiple charges: animal cruelty, reckless endangerment, illegal discharge of a firearm, and, given my identity, endangering a federal official. The media storm hit within hours. The story ran on every major outlet. HOA, President shoots Congressman's service dog in suburban dispute. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood. Pet rights activists began online campaigns. Veterans groups flooded my inbox with messages of support. Even politicians from the opposing party called me, some offering genuine sympathy, others scrambling for PR damage control. But none of that mattered compared to the only thing that did: Valor. He went into surgery for nearly 6 hours. The bullet had shattered part of his shoulder, but missed all major arteries and his lungs. The vet, a stoic man with graying hair and tired eyes, finally emerged from the OR and nodded. He's a fighter, he said. Most dogs wouldn't have made it, but he's stable. You can see him. When I stepped into that quiet, sterile recovery room, I saw Valor, bandaged, groggy, alive. I dropped to my knees beside him, laid my forehead against his side, and wept. I'm so sorry, I whispered. I should have protected you, but I promise, this isn't over. Because the woman who tried to break us just fired the wrong shot, at the wrong dog, at the wrong man, at the wrong time. And now, the world would hear about it. By Monday morning, the story had left the boundaries of my quiet suburban neighborhood and ignited like a wildfire across the nation. What had started as a senseless act of cruelty in a quiet cul-de-sac now stood front and center on every news channel, radio show, and social media feed across the country. The headlines were relentless, brutal, and unignorable. HOA President shoots Congressman's service dog in broad daylight. Veteran's companion animal shot in HOA dispute. Disabled Congressman's dog targeted by neighborhood. Official. The world knew now, and it was furious. Reporters camped outside the HOA office, microphones in hand, cameras rolling. Protesters gathered with signs that read, "Justice for Valor" and "No more HOA tyranny." Animal rights activists joined forces with disabled veterans groups and PTSD advocates, standing shoulder to shoulder in a massive outcry that had started with blood on my porch. Thousands of people who had never met me or Valor shared their own stories of HOA abuse, of service animals harassed and hurt, of power misused under the pretense of neighborhood harmony. Karen's name became a trending hashtag overnight, not in sympathy, but in infamy. Her mugshot, cold, disheveled mascara streaked down one cheek, circulated everywhere. No one was buying her excuse of self-defense. The video footage made sure of that. Security cam and doorbell recordings stitched together a full damning narrative. Valor still and calm on the porch, and Karen storming across the street like a vigilante, gun raised with shaking hands. The media played it. On loop, every frame a nail in the coffin of her defense. Legally, the system moved faster than I ever thought it could. She was charged with felony cruelty to animals, reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a weapon within city limits, and, because of who I was, an additional federal charge of endangering a protected official during active duty. The irony was cruel, but poetic. The woman who once mocked me for my congressional badge now faced charges that would never have existed if she had left me and my dog alone. But as the justice machine roared to life outside, I remained in the quietest place in the world, the Veterinary Trauma Center, watching Valor fight for his life. His first 2 days were touch and go. The bullet had shattered bone and torn through muscle, narrowly missing major arteries. The vets, God bless them, did everything they could. They placed him in a hyperbaric chamber, cycled him through transfusions, and monitored him around the clock. I stayed with him every night, curled in a corner chair, blazer folded under my head, watching every breath he took. Sometimes I held his paw. Sometimes I just sat in silence, the memories of our time together flooding back. On the floor of my congressional office after a panic attack, in the aisles of grocery stores when he calmed my shaking hands, beside me at the casket of a fallen comrade. The third night he opened his eyes, just for a moment, but it was enough. I broke down. Right there, in a sterile room filled with tubes and wires and blinking monitors, I wept harder than I had in years. I hadn't cried in combat. I hadn't cried when I was sworn into office. But I cried for Valor. He blinked again, his tail thudding softly against the side of the bed. That motion, so simple, so quiet, was the loudest thing I'd heard in days. By the 5th day, he was lifting his head. By the 7th, he was eating again. When he tried to stand, the vet held him steady and he leaned on her, confused but determined. He would never be the same physically. His left foreleg would carry a limp. But he was alive. My boy had survived. While Valor healed, I got to work. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person like me, veterans, disabled Americans, trauma survivors, who depended on their service animals and faced constant challenges and harassment from people who didn't understand or care. The moment I stepped back into the Capitol, the mood shifted. Not because of political allegiance, but because everyone, Republican and Democrat, had heard the story. Some had choked up telling me about their own dogs. Others admitted their spouses had cried watching the news. A few even hugged me, hard, wordlessly, before whispering, "We've got your back." I drafted the bill in one long, caffeine-fueled night. My staff helped polish the language, and by the end of the week, it had a name: Valor's Law. The bill proposed federal protection for all certified service animals, extending criminal penalties for anyone who injured or harassed them. It also included an addendum: mandatory background checks and training requirements for anyone elected to leadership positions in homeowner associations, including legal knowledge of the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and federal animal protection laws. It was time to hold people like Karen accountable before they pulled the trigger. When I introduced the bill on the floor, I didn't use fancy words or quotes from founding fathers. I just told the story. I held up a photo of Valor, one from before the shooting, where he stood beside me in uniform, tail wagging, eyes focused. I told them how he kept me alive, how he brought me home from war long after I landed on U.S. soil. And I told them what Karen did. The chamber was silent. Then came the applause. Valor's Law passed through committee in record time. It gained bipartisan co-sponsorship. Petitions online gathered over 3 million signatures. Schools started teaching the case in civic lessons. HOA watchdog groups used it to push their own reforms. Valor became more than a dog. He became a symbol, and Karen? She was formally indicted and denied bail. Her defense attorney argued mental instability, stress, paranoia, but the court didn't buy it. The judge ruled she was a threat to the peaceful, lawful function of society and a reckless actor in positions of limited authority. She faced a likely sentence of 5 to 7 years. The HOA board that once supported her tried to distance themselves, but they didn't get away unscathed. Leaked emails surfaced. Internal communications showed that Karen had written to fellow board members, suggesting creative ways to get the dog removed, including petitioning animal control and, chillingly, scaring him off with noise or movement. No one stopped her. No one reported her. That made them complicit. The entire board was dissolved. A new oversight policy was introduced for all HOAs in the state. A class action lawsuit followed from multiple neighbors who had suffered harassment. My own legal team offered free support to any disabled resident mistreated by a housing association, and through all of it, Valor healed, one step at a time. He walked again. He played again. And one morning, he surprised me, limping slowly down the hallway of our home, stopping beside the rocking chair and placing his chin on my lap. I set down my newspaper, rubbed his scarred shoulder gently, and whispered, "You're still the best damn congressman's aide I've ever had," because he was. It was a warm, tense morning when Karen's trial began. Cloudless sky, birdsong in the distance, the kind of peaceful day that stood in jarring contrast to the chaos she had unleashed just weeks earlier. The courtroom was packed. Victims of HOA overreach sat shoulder to shoulder with veterans, disability rights activists, animal lovers, and members of the press. And in the front row, I sat silently, dressed in a simple gray suit, Valor's leash draped loosely over my wrist. He lay beside me, calm but alert, wearing a soft orthopedic brace around his healing leg. The judge had made an exception to allow him inside, because the victim deserves to see justice too. The prosecution wasted no time. They showed the video footage first, grainy but unmistakable. Karen crossing the lawn with the pink revolver, Valor lying down, motionless, the gun raised, the shot, the aftermath. The room was deathly silent except for the occasional gasp or sob. The jury watched every second. Even the judge's expression tightened. There was no ambiguity, no room for spin. Karen took the stand, flanked by her defense attorney, her face pale and exhausted. The media had painted her as everything from a rogue tyrant to a mentally unstable vigilante. She'd shaved her hair short, worn a cardigan instead of her signature pastel blazer. The lawyer pleaded temporary insanity, stress, paranoia. He claimed Karen had suffered a neighborhood breakdown, exacerbated by unrealistic expectations of HOA leadership. He even tried to argue that she didn't know who I was, that perhaps if she had, she might have behaved differently. But that's what made it worse. The judge, a stone-faced woman with a reputation for measured fairness, leaned forward slowly. "Miss Strickland, this court doesn't care who he is. The question is, do you understand who Valor is? Do you understand what you took from him? From this veteran? From this nation?" Karen began to cry. "I didn't mean to hurt him," she sobbed. "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I thought he was dangerous. I just snapped." Her tears may have swayed some, but not those of us who knew what Valor had survived. Not those of us who had watched him recover one agonizing day at a time. Not those who had heard her own emails read aloud in court where she had written to fellow HOA members, "That dog is a menace. I don't care if he's got a vest. I want him gone." In the end, the verdict was swift, guilty on all counts: felony cruelty to animals, reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a weapon in a residential area, and given the federal implications, obstruction of justice related to the interference with a protected congressional officer. The judge delivered her sentence without theatrics. 3 years in state prison, probation denied. You are hereby prohibited from owning, possessing, or interacting with any animal for the remainder of your life. Karen collapsed into her chair. The courtroom murmured in approval. No one cheered. It wasn't a celebration. It was relief. A predator had been disarmed. An abuser had been held accountable. Finally. But the courtroom victory was just one battle. Outside those walls, real change had begun. The HOA board that had once upheld Karen's every petty fine and bogus violation, gone. An independent investigation launched by the state's attorney general exposed years of discriminatory behavior, inflated fines for minority homeowners, harassment of elderly residents, fabricated code violations against families with disabled members. Under public pressure, the city moved to implement sweeping reform. Every HOA in the county would now be subject to mandatory oversight, ADA training, and independent audits. Power would no longer sit unchecked behind the gates of planned communities. And Valor? Valor healed, slowly, painfully, but proudly. His scar became part of him, a badge as much as his service vest had ever been. The limp didn't slow him down forever. Physical therapy and sheer will carried him through. He learned to adjust, to climb stairs again, to sit by my desk during late-night policy sessions. But more than that, he reminded me why I started this journey in the first place. Valor wasn't just a dog, he was a mirror. He reflected the resilience, loyalty, and love that so many veterans return home yearning to feel again. So I made a promise, to him and to every person who saw themselves in our story. A month after the trial, I stood at the local park, the same one where Valor had first played with the neighborhood kids before Karen's threats turned it into a battleground. Hundreds had gathered, families, neighbors, press, even congressional colleagues. I stepped up to the podium, with Valor beside me, and announced the launch of the Valor Initiative, a national foundation dedicated to funding service animals for veterans and trauma survivors. We'd provide training, placement, and legal protection for every service animal we could support. No more waiting lists, no more red tape, just direct, life-saving impact. Valor sat proudly, a small bronze congressional medal clipped to his collar, presented to him earlier that week by a bipartisan group of veterans in office. A little girl approached him during the event, hesitant at first. Her mother whispered, "It's okay. He's safe." Valor extended his nose toward her. gently, patiently, and she reached out and touched his scar. "That's where he got hurt?" she asked. I knelt beside her. "That's where he became a hero." Karen tried to appeal her sentence, of course. Her attorney released a video online claiming she was the real victim, that the media had twisted the narrative, that people like her were under attack. It backfired. Donations to the Valor Initiative spiked by 300% that week. Schools held essay contests about service dogs. Talk shows aired specials on PTSD support. Valor even appeared on the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "Healing After Hurt." Months later, I returned to Congress full-time, but I carried a new fire. With me, one rooted not in politics but in purpose. I pushed through new bills strengthening ADA enforcement. I expanded the definition of protected service animals. I fought against bureaucratic indifference. And Valor, he remained at my side for every speech, every floor vote, every visit to the VA hospitals where other veterans lit up at the sight of him. He had become more than my companion. He was a movement. The story could have ended in tragedy. And in some ways, it did. A piece of valor was taken that day on the porch. A piece of my faith in community shattered alongside the gunfire. But from that wreckage, something greater emerged. Accountability, reform, justice, and a legacy. Because now when a service dog walks through a neighborhood, people pause. They respect the vest, they remember the story, they know what that dog means, all because one woman tried to silence him and instead gave him a voice loud enough to echo across the country. If you believe in protecting our heroes, both human and canine, share this story. Talk about valor, talk about injustice, and help build a world where no one with a service animal ever has to face what we did. Subscribe to the HOA stories and be part of the movement. One voice can start a fire. One dog can start a revolution.